So, the first speaker battled mosquitoes, mountains, and blistering heat. He did an extraordinary journey across one of the world's most fascinating subcontinents, and he did it all for £1.50 a day, showing us all that you don't have to have a big budget to have a big adventure. Ollie Broadhead, walking India from the Bay of Bengal to the Arabian Sea.
Okay, tonight I'm going to be talking about a recent expedition I did, walking across India with my good friend Angus Walker, who's in the audience. We walked from the Bay of Bengal on the east coast to the Arabian Sea on the west coast. As has been said, we walked on an incredibly low budget. We walked on £1.50 a day, not because we particularly wanted to, but because we're both students, so we didn't really have much choice in the matter. As a result of this, we were sleeping rough. We were eating in local lodges like this one, where you can get a meal of sort of a rice cake and some curry for about 20 pence, so you can live very cheaply. We started in the state of Tamil Nadu on the east coast, and we arrived at the very end of the dry season. So as you can see, the riverbed, we actually started in a riverbed in a large river estuary on the coast. And when we arrived, it was about 45 degrees in the day. We tried walking through the day for the first 3 days, and I actually got quite bad heat sickness. So from then on, we switched to this sort of strategy of waking up at 2 in the morning and walking through till 10, and then sleeping through the day and getting up again in the evening to walk, because you just couldn't walk in the day. But very quickly, the monsoon arrived, because we were in this transition period between the end of the dry season and the beginning of the monsoon. And as you can see here, the clouds are in the background and the river's filled up. This is the Kaveri River. It's the southernmost of the 5 sacred rivers in India. As many of you will know, Alistair Humphreys walked across South India several years ago, and this was not a replication, but this was inspired by his walk. We stuck with the Kaveri for the initial 2 weeks of our journey, and then moved away from it. As a sacred river, these are the Hoganakal Falls. These are sacred waterfalls. There's approximately 2,000 Hindu pilgrims coming down to wash in these suspended cages. We were the only Westerners there. We washed in these cages, and it was absolutely fantastic. Everyone was hugely excited that we were there. This is our route. As you can see, we didn't walk in a very straight line. We actually took this fairly significant detour of about 500 kilometers. And I'm not very good at planning, but I had initially planned to walk from this city, E-Road, and then cross through this mountain pass through some wildlife reserves to Mysore. But very unfortunately, just before we arrived, 2 leopards, this one and another one, had killed 2 men on the road we were planning on walking on the mountain pass. So obviously we weren't allowed through there. The guards had put up a curfew. Even the locals weren't allowed out after dark at that period, because both the leopards were still active in that area. So we ended up detouring to Bangalore. This was a bit mad, because we'd initially, the first month of our journey, we were walking on these small dirt roads between very isolated villages in rural India, and suddenly we're in a city of 4 million people, and it's only 60 kilometers wide, sort of slums on the outskirts going to a very dense city. But it took us just over 4.5 days to walk, and you can see why. I mean, this is really a best-case scenario. This is a best-case scenario for walking through Bangalore, because if there are people, there aren't vehicles, and walking next to vehicles in India is ridiculous. Walking in on a motorway, coming into Bangalore on an underpass, because there's no there's no regulations on fumes, so none of the car exhausts have filters, and you're just breathing in soot, and you're sweating black soot, and your eyes are stinging, and your breath's stinging, and it's horrible. But we got out the other side, and we moved in to Karnataka state, out of Tamil Nadu state. Now, Tamil Nadu is a very low-lying, very hot state, so it's a sort of flat grassland habitat. And as you move up into Karnataka, you move up into this plateau, so it's much cooler. And you move into this proper tiger forest, this jungle environment, which is fantastic. This is an Asian elephant footprint. But it does have its own challenges. The night after this photo was taken, we were camping up in a field. A bit about camping, actually. We were traveling very, very light. We were sort of 7-kilogram packs, about 10% of our body weight, because we're trying to cover about 35 to 40 kilometers a day in tropical heat. You want to pack light. So as a result of this, we didn't take tents or bivvies. We really just stuck with a sleeping bag and a sleep mat each. So we're just sleeping completely rough out in the open. Set up in this field. And in the distance, we can see the banana plantation kind of ends about a kilometre away, and you're moving up into these forested hills, and it's a wildlife reserve. There's wildlife reserves everywhere in the area we're walking, which is fantastic, but a bit unfortunate when you're trying to wend your way through them. So we're setting out, and just as we were about to go to sleep, this group of 5 farmers came over and told us that literally 2 days ago, on the previous Tuesday, at 6 in the morning, they'd come down and there'd been a tiger sitting 50 meters from where we were about to camp, eating a cow. And this was, and this was apparently a fairly regular occurrence. So we moved on fairly quickly, and we ended up in the next town, climbing on top of one of these. This is an Indian bus shelter. They're absolutely fantastic. They're 12-foot tall concrete structures, and they're ideal when you're near a reserve, worried about leopards at night, because when you're on top, you've got this lovely concrete platform, and you're well out of sight, and absolutely stunning views. You get 5-star views from a bus shelter. And away from the light pollution, you've got the Milky Way, and certainly we utilised these a lot as we went through the reserves, and you've got the fruit bats coming over every evening from the fig trees and flying out into the field, so absolutely fantastic. Sleeping rough anywhere in the world is fantastic, but here it was absolutely brilliant. And then we moved up again, and it got colder again as we moved up into the Western Ghats. Now, the Western Ghats are a series of mountainous hills that run down the west coast of South India. It's cloud forest, which means it's high up, and it means it's cold and wet. And I am, as I've said previously, not a good planner. So I'd sort of said it's going to be hot, 45 degrees. We'd come from 45 degrees to 10 degrees. As I said, very poorly equipped for sleeping, and we spent about 2 weeks shivering and damp. Nothing dried out. We basically had sleepless nights for 2 weeks as we moved through here. But the days were fantastic, because Angus and I are both biology students, so there's a lot of insect, a lot of bird life in this cloud forest. It's brilliant. The mammals at this point will have dispersed because the monsoon had well and truly hit at this point. So when the monsoon arrives, all the animals that are sort of converged around the watering holes, they move out and disperse. And we reached Kaveri. Kaveri is the source of the Kaveri River. The Kaveri River almost completely crosses the subcontinent. It flows from the very west coast all the way across the east coast. There's basically a large marsh surrounding these temples, and the water flows out this marsh into a large granite pool, and that's the source of the river. And we did reach the source, though we didn't actually follow the river the whole way across the country. Luckily, from here, it's a very short distance to the Arabian Sea, so we had this week where we walked back out of the cloud forest, and it was fantastic. We came out from the cloud forest into the dry forest, and that was the first time we'd seen the sun in 2 weeks, which is a bit mad when you think you're in a tropical country, but actually when you're in the cloud forest above the cloud line, it's just constant rain in the monsoon season. And we arrived at the Arabian Sea. When you're on a journey like this, we were walking for almost 2 months. You spend so much time as you're walking along just picturing what's the end going to be like. You've got this, you build it up in your head, and so often it's disappointing. But this was fantastic. We arrived at the Arabian Sea at sunset. So often in India there was this little festival going on with guys in demon masks beating drums, so it was absolutely a brilliant end to the journey. I think traveling in the Asian continent is fantastic, because you've got to remember that the Western culture is not what the vast majority of humans alive today are experiencing. Most people alive today live in Asia. So to immerse yourself in a different culture and remind yourself that Western culture is not the only one out there is brilliant. We certainly were very cut off just because we were sticking to these remote villages and these sort of paths between them. You don't have to go to the jungle or Antarctica to really isolate yourself. You can do it just by moving off what you call the tourist trail. I think it's very important to do adventures like this, because compared to these so-called adventure holidays, which are sort of thrown around a lot now, because they allow you to really grow, and you're following a passion and obsession. You're not following a school project. I've been in education my whole life. It's not something set by a teacher or the government or your parents. You've come up with this project. I want to do this expedition or this expedition, and you go out and you fully commit to that. So it's so much more rewarding when you complete it. And there are going to be these moments in a proper adventure where you have these points where you're just completely out of your depth. You're in over your head. We had an attempted mugging, we had a leopard encounter, we had me getting heat sick. And these moments where you just can't do anything control. And before you go out and risk it and take those moments, you're very nervous of going out and seeing what you can do. But after you realise and you complete something like this and you realise you can deal with those moments, it's sort of a snowballing effect of confidence, and it just pushes you to do more, to go bigger, and to progress and go on bigger and better expeditions, which is exactly what I think me and Angus intend to do. But I think I'll leave it there for tonight, so thank you very much.